The original idea for this video was actually going to be a 9-part series where I went through every movie in the franchise and talked about all the problems. But when I got through about 10 minutes into the third, I realized that every movie struggles with the same core issues. Now, instead of doing that, I'll talk about one specific flaw during each movie. The intent is that you can use this as a tool to better understand filmmaking and hopefully jump back to whatever chapter you want to understand more. For example, if you want to learn about editing or think you saw a movie with bad editing, you can go back to the chapter with that again to get a refresher. In this video, I'll be covering the following: character arc and character development, momentary editing, dialogue and score, structural editing, how one scene can ruin a movie, a villain with no motivation, just get the shot, and framing as it pertains to male gaze and masculinity. Some of these movies have even more flaws than this, like the first 4 have a difficulty of making female characters anything more than just eye candy and items, but I'll stick with these 8. I also won't include Hobbs and Shaw because I don't really count it in my eyes, and I also can't get footage for F9, so I'm only going to do the 8 core movies including Tokyo Drift. So without wasting any more time, let's get going with...
Ow! I smell skanks.
The first movie is one of the more memorable and enjoyable of the franchise, mainly because there's stakes built in, something the others either forget about, or just completely blow out of proportion that the stakes become irrelevant. The problem is that this movie is filled with one-dimensional characters that never grow besides Brian. If you remove Brian from the story, there's no point for this movie to exist, because there's no development for anyone. Brian is the most fleshed out character of anyone in the movie, and that isn't saying a whole lot because Brian really has no character. Let me explain why. So Brian, our point of view character, is an undercover cop who joined the force because, well, we don't really know why, and drives really well because, well, we don't really know why. He has an extensive knowledge of cars, and the first scene we see with him is him practicing driving because he's undercover. Brian not only appears incredibly knowledgeable about cars, but also is a great driver. At the same time, Brian doesn't know how street racing works, is extremely happy with almost winning, and almost destroys his car because he hasn't been in the street racing scene.
Dude, I almost had you.
You almost had me?
Brian is constantly being ignored by his higher-ups after doing his job, and if we contrast this with the other characters, you'll see what I mean about Brian being the only motivational character. Dom is an overly aggressive, extremely protective womanizer that has massive respect in the street racing scene.
Move your car.
No, bullshit! Put it down now! No more running!
I'm not running!
Dom is not only overly aggressive, but is so manly that any emotion he has is extreme anger and over-masculine to compensate for his insecurities. Vince, compared to him, is overly aggressive, extremely confident, and overly masculine man who believes he deserves Mia because he's more manly and muscular than anyone else. When Brian comes to the shop to flirt with Mia, Vince attacks Brian, and Dom threatens Brian to never come there again. After the race scene, the cops come and almost catch Dom before Brian picks him up and saves Dom's life. After this point, Brian is let into the group and gets the respect of Dom, but Vince isn't satisfied. Vince is, yet again, incredibly aggressive and appears to want to fight Brian before Dom steps in. Throughout the movie, Vince is insecure about his feelings and deserves zero respect or sympathy because he's a jerk to our point of view character. Even when Vince shows up for the cookout, his ego can't take the fact that Brian will be flirting with Vince's crush, Mia, who turned him down multiple times, so Vince storms off like a little man-child and speeds away in true tiny dick fashion.
Vince, get over here and give us a hand.
Looks like you got all the help you need, brother!
Near the end of the movie, when Brian finds out that Dom and the gang are going to rob a truck and the truck driver is armed, Brian tells Mia he's undercover cop and needs to save Dom and the group. Vince is trapped on the truck and surely will die, but Brian comes to save Vince's life. This is good character development for Brian because he saves an irredeemable man. Well, wait, is it good character development? Because throughout the movie, Brian has helped those around him because of his job or because he actually cares about the group, so saving Vince's life isn't a lesson that Brian really needed to learn and wasn't a character that needed to be saved. Vince, on the other hand, was set up to be redeemed through his overly aggressive, overcompensating personality, Instead is saved because Brian's a good person, and the last confrontation between Brian and Vince is this.
Come on, Vince, hang in there, come on!
Vince never apologizes or thanks Brian for saving him, he just survives. And then we don't see anything from him until the 5th movie, where we're supposed to enjoy the fact that this massive asshole is back in the franchise. If anything, Brian wasn't the character that needed to save Vince, it was Vince that needed to save Brian. On the other hand, the other meathead, Dom, is the exact same thing as Vince. The only difference is he respects Brian after Brian saves him twice. Dom meets every difficulty with violence, yelling, and over-masculine responses because that's all his character is.
Sounds like a serial killer name. Is that what you are?
No, man.
Don't come around here again.
Where's Leon and Letty?
They're long gone.
Then it's over. I didn't call the police, but don't push me! Put the gun down! I swear to God!
You are the cop! You're a cop!
Dom has no depth to his character, and he's what every man aspires to be, portrayed as the alpha Chad man's man that womanizes every single woman and meets every hardship with physical violence.
Ow! I smell skanks.
Nothing proves this point more than the final scene of the movie. So here, Dom knows that Brian is a cop, and Brian and Dom are chasing these men who gunned down Jesse. After killing both men, Brian and Dom meet at a stoplight where Dom challenges Brian to a race. Dom and Brian see a train coming, and Dom, the overcompensating man he is, can't slow down to try and, avoid a wreck and possible death. And Brian also decides to take a challenge because he's Brian. They surprisingly both survive, but then Dom runs into a semi. Brian runs over to check on Dom, and not only is Dom more composed than he's been in the entire movie, he also says,
That's not what I had in mind.
while not shedding a tear, yelling out in pain, or showing a hint of weakness. The ultimate man's man. Vince and Dom have no depth to their character, but at least we can see one character with some depth in it, Jesse. Jesse's the 5th or 6th most important character, and he is the one who died in the last scene I just talked about. Jesse is this mechanic kid that has great character development with Brian right here.
I got that. What's it called? That attention disorder.
Or ADD?
Yes, that shit. Yeah.
Then later, after not being in the scene for almost 40 minutes, Jesse bets his dad's car so Jesse can win his dad a car when he gets out of prison. Jesse loses the race and his dad's car and runs away, only to show up again at the very end to be swiftly shot down. Jesse's the only character with actual character, and he isn't one of the main characters, so it's blatantly obvious he's going to be the one that's going to be killed in the first interaction with Brian because they try to make him sympathetic. There's nothing wrong with making a sympathetic character if you give any one of these other characters depth or redeeming qualities, but the movie decided they only need to develop the point of view character and the person that dies. Dom and Vince are more worried about their dick-wagging contests than rather being a good person or a redeemable character. Jesse's the least bit important to the plot and really is only built in to make the audience care for someone in Dom's group.
Garage. How we gonna do that, bruh?
Pockets ain't empty, cuz.
Too Fast, Too Furious is hilarious to watch. It might be my favorite because it's arguably one of the worst ones. I could talk about the truly horrible dialogue,
35 large, huh? Either that or you can go home, bruh.
or even the terrible score. But instead, I want to talk about momentary editing. When talking about editing, there's two types, structural and momentary. Structural will be covered later and consists more of how the movie flows as a whole and the plot development. Momentary is more concerned with the shot-by-shot flow of the edit. This is what we'll talk about for this movie. When talking in this section and structural editing, I'll be using the term the editor. The editor is not one specific person, but an actual group of people editing the film, but it just makes more sense to say the editor, just for time's sake. Okay, so this movie starts off in the iconic way of a race at the beginning. When the racers can't find a fourth person, Tej calls Brian to come over in 4 minutes and race. Instead of showing a quick montage of him driving over, or having a hard cut of him being there making it seem like he instantly showed up because of how fast he had gotten there, The editor decides that this is a good time to cut some B-roll of some cars blasting music next to each other with irrelevant characters, and adds some truly terrible sound editing. Then we get a man dancing for less than 1 second. Tej announces that the race starts soon, and we get 2 angles of horribly spray-painted lines, and then we cut to some girl power with Suki and her group prepare for the race. Then the editor decides to intercut Brian racing over with more dancing, Instagram models posing in front of cars, guys arguing, over-sexualized women walking, people jumping up and down for some reason, people dancing for 1 second, and then finally Brian shows up. What's so wrong with these decisions is that the editor's job is to decide what to show and what not to show. None of these shots matter. These people aren't relevant, and these things don't matter. It's essentially 90 seconds of the audience waiting with the characters of the movie for Brian to show up for the race to start. It would make very little difference if Brian were just at the race and was asked to be the 4th racer out of the blue. Finally, the race starts and nothing has changed. After Brian and Slapjack take a commanding lead over Suki and Orange Julius, it seems pretty apparent that Suki and Orange Julius do not need to be shown again because they just can't win. Instead, the editor decides to continually cut back to Suki and Orange Julius racing each other in their close 3rd and 4th place battle for some reason. Even after Brian won the entire race, the filmmakers decide that it's a perfect time to cut back to Suki and Orange Julius, even though the race is over. The stakes are gone, and these two do not matter. After the race is done, we get another cop chase scene, and Brian is enlisted to go back undercover for a new bad man as he recruits his old childhood best friend, Roman. Oh, I forgot. Did I mention that none of the people from the beginning of the movie have anything to do with the movie ever again? Yeah, Suki, Orange Julius, and Slapjack can be entirely written out of the story, and nothing would be changed. It would be the exact same thing. This is why editing is hard to split up, because even though the momentary editing of this movie is substantially worse than the structural, it still affects the structural to where the whole movie has bad editing. Following this race scene, Brian gets arrested, and this is just a flurry of bad edits. So when Brian gets surrounded, we get 4 consecutive cuts matching with the score, but why would they make these cuts? The intent is to try and make it dramatic when Brian looks over, but we don't get the effect of this because there isn't a reveal Brian has or something he notices. We just go to the next scene. It's also jarring because there's 4 shots that are clearly from the same one continuous shot, but the editor wanted to move the speed of the camera up, so they just cut 4 times to try and mask the slow camera movement rather than allowing the scene to play out. Once that's over, we fade into Brian into an interrogation room with the establishment of being so with a sign. Nothing wrong with this besides the use of a fade cut, which really has no need being here. Following this, we get a cut with the interrogators entering the room to a horrible looking shot. This is only framed this way so that this former FBI director, agent guy, recognizes Brian, can walk into frame, and the audience can realize that this man remembers Brian. And finally, we cut to a Dutch angle extreme blow shot of the FBI agent towering over Brian. Okay, there's a lot to unpack. The J cut into the guys entering the room is done well because they have the audio come before the cut. But the cut itself is unnecessary because the movement of the camera angle is too minuscule to make it seem like the cut was needed. If anything, this cut makes it feel like it was a second take of the same shot that was cut together to make it feel like one continuous shot, but in reality, the movement isn't far enough to feel this way, so it just feels like 2 consecutive shots of the same angle. Then we have the FBI agent noticing Brian before we cut to a close-up on Brian, and the FBI agent walks in. The close-up works to see Brian's reaction, but then the ensuing shot is just ugly. It works in the context that Brian has no power in this confrontation because his gig is up and someone notices him, so Brian can't fake like he's not Brian O'Connor. But they also decided to combine this with a Dutch angle shot. A Dutch angle is an offset shot where you're not symmetrical and tilted to give the feeling of something disorienting or uneasy. It's used really well in scenes like this.
You're worried about me.
That's right.
Where you're trying to convey this message. This shot in Too Fast, Too Furious doesn't accomplish either of those feelings because it doesn't intend to do this. We aren't disoriented narratively to require this shot, and we don't have the feeling of unease because there's no tension built up when the FBI agent walks into frame before Brian notices him, making this shot ugly and unnecessary. There are literally dozens more examples from this movie, but I want to leave us off with my favorite scene in the entire Fast and Furious franchise.
Let your man go, huh?
Drop it, I don't want to talk about it.
Drop it, hell. I want to hear about this, homie.
I said forget about it, cuz.
This is the take they decided to use. Not only is it so unnatural, but we pan into a close-up of Brian saying,
I said forget about it, cuz.
Okay, actually, one more, really quick.
Pockets ain't empty, cuz.
Truly a spectacular way to end this movie.
Can he drive?
Can he drive?
You know what DK stands for? Donkey Kong.
So I'm talking about the Fast and Furious movies in order of release date, not in chronological order. So Tokyo Drift is next. I included dialogue and score into this one because I wish I could talk about each of these separately, but there aren't enough movies to talk about the truly horrible decisions made. So this movie does almost the exact same thing as the previous. It starts with an unnecessary race scene where all the characters except for one are in the movie after the first scene. This first scene has yet again some of the worst decisions made. We start with a musical montage where we see Sean let this kid bully and abuse this fat kid. And then the first interaction we hear is this.
Nice ride.
Does the job.
What job? Delivering pizzas?
Most dialogue is not how normal humans talk, but this starts off on the wrong foot, skipping over half the sentences a normal conversation would have by getting to the point with every answer. I mean, sure, it's passable, but then we get arguably the worst concept in the movie where Chad QB Star, that looks 45, has his girlfriend offering herself up as the prize for the race. Not only is our main character cool with winning her as a prize, but also the relationship with football guy was clearly horrible because she has no problem offering herself up as a prize to leave her boyfriend for some hick she just talked to. Just to top it off, she tells Clay to make it interesting because she wants to play with her boyfriend's emotions. Now in the middle of the race, the woman who just put herself up as a prize tells Clay,
I thought you loved me.
this is some top-notch psychological abuse. And now when she says she has a new date for prom, man-child gets mad and drives his $80,000 car into this piece of shit car. This is where I realized all the movies were the exact same. There is one man-child fighting another man-child for something petty, and there are women that don't have any relevance besides items. Then we get arguably the worst decision made in the movie right here. Now the action is jarring as it should be, but right here we know that Sean and the couple will survive these crashes for one simple reason: the score. The score has been going basically the entire movie, and even during this very traumatic crash where Sean flips multiple times and this couple slams into this concrete pipe, I know they will survive because this upbeat rock music that has been going for 3 minutes now is still blasting in the background. Even when we see the point of view character meeting their apparent death, there's no suspense in the scene because the music tells us we don't need to worry about this. The film is communicating non-verbally, we don't need to worry, but because the music says we're having fun with the scene, not worrying about if someone dies from this. And in the end, we were right. All three people leave the scene with few scratches and leave the police station that day. Later, when Sean is sent to his father's in Japan, the only black guy shows up and tries to sell Sean a laptop and phone, and then Twinkie happens to have a steering wheel out where Sean can see it and mention that they're both interested in racing in cars. This isn't a problem with the dialogue alone, it's just incredibly lazy that they couldn't think of another way to write about how their interests in cars overlap, or how Twinkie and Sean became friends. Later we get one of the worst lines in the movie.
When you blow your wad, man.
There's so many lines in this movie that are lazy writing.
Damn, man. You know Yakuza, the mafia.
Super convenient in the plot.
Can he drive?
Can he drive?
You know what DK stands for?
Donkey Kong?
Drift King.
Drift. What do you mean, drift?
Or incredibly stupid.
Easy to sound cocky when you got no pride. Take mine.
Now, the score part of this section is less of something I can explain with examples to show how bad it is, so I'll just randomly click to any section of this movie to show what I mean. There is very rarely a second in this movie that isn't filled with music. The music doesn't enhance a story or have any plot relevance. It's actually the filmmakers realizing the movie is horrible, so they try to mask it with constant music because otherwise the viewer would get bored out of their mind. The editing comes to a screeching halt in this scene where Twinkie and Sean go to get Twinkie's car. It's played off as comedic effect to show his car compared to the others, but once we see his car, we sit here for 40 seconds as the car slowly comes down and spins in front of our main characters. The music is added on top because the scene is so incredibly boring and irrelevant without it, and still is irrelevant without it, but the editor thinks that adding music will make the viewer not notice how trash it is. So the score and the dialogue are horrible to this movie, and the music is added to try and mask the glaring holes in the movie. I think I could have listed 150 different horrible lines and talked about the ending drift scene where people are watching on cell phones to just show how terrible the editing is. But I want to keep this short, so let's just get on to the next movie.
You know, I would have won that race if you didn't cheat, right?
You hit your head hard.
2 sections ago, I talked about momentary editing, and now we're on to structural editing. Now, this movie also has problems with both types of editing, but for the most part, the most glaring issues are because of structural editing. The movie has a different start than the previous, not having a race, but a heist scene. After this, in the following recovery, we jump cut to Brian running down a guy. And what's so wrong with this is it's impossible for the viewer to get their bearings of what's going on, because we instantly jump into the middle of a chase scene, never allowing the audience to get a grasp of what's happening on the screen until the very end of it. This is less of structural editing and more of I hate it editing. One thing to note, this movie revolves entirely off of Letty's death. The plot, Dom's motivations, Brian's involvement all have to do with Letty dying. Keep that in mind. After the chase scene, we cut back to Dom, who's having to run because the cops almost have him. He leaves Letty without saying goodbye to her, and then Letty, a main character in this franchise, is killed in a car accident when Dom leaves. Now, why is the screen black, you may ask? Well, when Dom is in Panama City, he gets a call from Mia, and we cut to a funeral that all the main casts are at. We are told that Letty has died off-screen somewhere else. We have a jump cut to a jarring chase scene, and then we follow it up with the main character dying off-screen. A perfect display of horrible editing decisions. And you thought that was the end of this. So we start to see in this movie and the following ones after this that Dom has turned from an amazing driver to the world's smartest spy ever, better than even James Bond. So Dom goes to the crash scene and remakes the entire crash in his head and knows exactly where to find his killer, but the cops could never figure any of this out apparently. A lot later in the movie, Brian saves Dom and Dom is reminiscing over Letty. He finds Letty's phone and calls the last number she called with to let him deduce that she called Brian, so now he knows that she was working for Brian. Dom tries to kill Brian because Brian is responsible for Letty's death, but Brian lets Dom know that Letty did it so Dom could have his record wiped clean. The intent is supposed to be that this is a twist in the middle of the second act, but it just doesn't work. Here's why. Letty dies off screen for an unknown reason. We find out through Dom that she's working undercover for Brian, and Brian reveals she worked to try and bring Dom back. What was the point of having Letty die off screen and hide the fact that she's working undercover for Brian? I'm not really sure. Why not have the motivation be we see her working for Brian and that we see the car crash so that Dom and the audience have a reason for why he's so mad and why he's seeking revenge. Instead, we have her die off screen and have main characters tell us key plot points rather than showing us both of these facts.
She did it for you, Dom! She did it for you! Letty came to me to clear your name in exchange for bringing down Braga.
The entire point this movie exists is because Letty dies, and Dom wants revenge. And the editor decides the best way to convey his grief and anger is to have it be done off-screen and explain her involvement with Braga being told to us through another character, rather than showing us that we can sympathize with Dom.
A patrol officer. You heard me.
But why? We have many more experienced people.
I like her smile.
What's the second thing?
Stay the fuck out of my way.
This movie is by far the best, technically, of all of them. I prefer watching the first four because they make cars look cool and are laughably terrible. And I don't like 6 and on because they're just incredibly unrealistic and I don't buy into it. Movie 5 is the transition into super spy unrealistic movie type, but it isn't too far from reality where I'm uninterested. There are flaws with Fast 5, sure, but it's not so bad like the other ones that I almost thought about skipping this one. Keyword is almost, because the first half of the movie is pretty great. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's great in the eyes of the Fast and Furious franchise. They did a good job developing the world, the relationships, the stakes, and the villain. It was almost near a good movie, but then this scene happens.
The plan is busted. This is bullshit, man. Reyes knows we're coming.
Now, there's nothing wrong with this scene in a bottle. This scene is done well. The problem is because of what happened before. So before the scene, we had an Ocean's 11 style montage where we got the specs of the vault. We got the montage of them trying to drive but failing. We got them recovering information to get into the vault, and spent a majority of the movie preparing for this heist where the audience has a good understanding of what will happen. Then this scene happens, and everything changes. When Ocean's 11 did it, they didn't have to change the entire plan, and nearly kept all of it as is, only changing a few moments to get a great third act twist. In Fast 5, the entire plan is changed to where none of the scenes gathering information, practicing the perfect drive, planning out cracking the safe, or stealing the cop cars have anything to do with the new plan. Sure, some of the information is kind of used, but the core fundamentals changed to the plan. Again, this could still pass as acceptable if it weren't for the fact that they changed the entire approach less than 24 hours from the heist, and the plan is still incredibly elaborate and well thought out to avoid giving the money to Hobbs. They avoid being caught, they get the antagonist caught, and no one dies. This is similar to Ocean's 11 in almost every way, but one keeps the core of the plan, while the other comes up with an entirely new plan less than 24 hours before the heist off screen for this third act reveal. It's cool the moment they reveal it, but when you start to think about it, it leaves a sour taste in your mouth because you soon realize that so much time is wasted on events that never transpire to anything.
They got a tank. I'm sorry. Did somebody just say a tank?
And this is where I got bored with the franchise. I could talk about how this movie has every character as one-dimensional as they get, but instead I want to talk about the antagonist of this movie, Shaw. No, not this Shaw. The brother of this Shaw, the original Shaw. I'm going to start with a short plot summary to get my point across as I read through it. Following their successful heist in Brazil, Dominic Toretto and his professional crew have fled around the world and are living peacefully. Meanwhile, DSS agent Luke Hobbs and Riley Hicks investigate the destruction of Russian military convoy by a crew led by former British SAS major and special ops soldier Owen Shaw. Hobbs persuades Dom to help capture Shaw by showing him a photo of his supposedly murdered girlfriend, Letty Ortiz. Dom and his crew accept the mission in exchange for amnesty and allowing them to return to the United States. So Shaw is introduced as a highly trained former military man gone rogue. He's targeting a tech bomb to blind a country, and Hobbs, a trained military hunter, has recruited Dominic Toretto, a street racer, and his crew to take down a former military specialist. It's not only ludicrous that they could possibly make us believe that Dom and his group would be any benefit or advantage for Hobbs, but also we are never given any indication of motivation for why Shaw needs this tech bomb to attack a country, and we'll never be told. We go through an entire movie where Shaw, a former military man turned mercenary, is plotting to take down a country with zero indication that someone has bought him to do this. It would help if there were like a greater power above Shaw, but nope. Instead, we're meant to believe that Shaw wants to take out a country because he's just purely evil, and that's all the reasoning we need. Letty's also back in the movie, and Shaw takes pride in the fact that Letty doesn't remember anything. So we spent 2 hours fighting a man with zero motivation, spelt out for us that he's bad because we say so. They couldn't have at least established why he's forming military or why he has a vengeance against generic insert country here. The point of this movie is for Dom to bring Letty back, so I get that this guy is sort of a side mission and Letty is the true goal, but why would Luke Hobbs reach out to former street racers to help work as special agents taking down a highly trained former military man? It's so out of left field for this franchise because Dom isn't a super spy, but acts like it in movies 5 through 9. Shaw also isn't a good character because we never get any explanation for his plot to overthrow a government, or a need to have this tech bomb to help him overthrow this government. The writers just decide that the idea of overthrowing a government is compelling enough that the viewer will buy into the idea. This is becoming more and more like mindless Transformers jargon, because nothing makes logical sense. There's no motivation for Shaw to do anything that he does, because we're never told what he's doing. Each character stays the exact same, and in some cases like Rome's, they regress, and they decide to make characters invincible in this movie. Not only do you have an antagonist that has zero motivation, you have main characters that are never going to die, and characters that are one-dimensional as hell.
Hey man, which one of these things is $1?
If you give Shaw at least an explanation for his evil plot, it helps motivate him to where we understand the point of the movie. Sure, it doesn't fix the fact that the team just became the greatest counter-terrorist assets in the entire world, but we're working with a pretty horrible franchise in the first place, so let's not expect them to do everything perfectly.
Somebody just walk me through what we're supposed to be doing.
Come on, Rome, this was your plan. You gotta embrace it.
No, this was not my plan.
This is the worst in the franchise by a country mile, in my opinion. Not only are they ignoring basic physics, but also the story is just awful. So this movie starts with Shaw talking to Shaw, only this Shaw is the cool Shaw and the other guy needs to go play Bard in the Hobbit movie, so we got a new Shaw. Dom is again approached by Hobbs to get Shaw because, well, it doesn't matter. Dom's Dom. Dom and Shaw get into this confrontation, and Kurt Russell essentially lets Shaw get away to tell Dom that they actually need to go get this new piece of equipment called God's Eye to capture Shaw, even though they almost just had him. So then we decide that now is a good time to go on a 30-minute side mission to save a girl who created God's Eye to help us get Shaw. In this incredibly long side mission, we get cars dropping out of planes parachuting onto the road, Brian running up a bus falling off a cliff onto a drifting car at over 50 miles per hour, catching the spoiler and surviving. We also get Dom driving off a cliff, flipping at least a couple dozen times and leaving with no injuries, and we also get introduced to a new antagonist. Man, that shot was intense. He must be incredibly important, and I totally know his name. I can't express how terrible this decision is because this shot makes it feel like a very intense reveal where this antagonist has a long storied past with this franchise, as if Braga was brought back. But this guy is brand new to the franchise and isn't even the main antagonist in this movie. Just a horrible decision by the director because the shot contradicts what the movie is saying. Then, after saving the girl who made God's Eye, we go on another ridiculously long side mission again to sneak into a billionaire's party to steal a chip from one of the most expensive cars ever in one of their 3 skyscrapers, as Dom lifts this car with ease, and then after almost being locked out, they decide to just drive the car out in the middle of this chaos, and we get one of the single greatest deliveries of dialogue in the entire franchise.
Thank God you showed up. These parties bore me to death.
Back to Dom and Brian as they drive the car out the window of one skyscraper into another, but then, uh-oh, the brakes don't work. So they drive into the next one and magically roll out of the car before falling to their death from a car going way too fast for either of them to survive this. After this, we finally get back to the main story nearly an hour after never seeing Shaw again until this point. Shaw is in the middle of nowhere, waiting for Dom and the gang to show up, and Brian clearly has a shot on Shaw, but doesn't take it so we can have this prolonged discussion and watch a few of Kurt Russell's men die, and they also lose God's Eye in the process of doing this. After this, we get the cast staring out into the city skyline awkwardly, all looking forwards and plotting. Finally, we get the intense meetup where the crew do the super realistic transfers of Ramsey as she jumps from car to try and survive missiles from killing her. In the midst of all of this, Dom has a clear shot on Shaw and decides he must take the ego duel. He drops the gun and pulls out a crowbar and an incredibly large wrench to fight Shaw to the death. In the end, we get a nice send-off for Paul Walker following his death during the filming of this scene. Okay, what the f just happened in this movie? So not only did we spend the majority of the runtime following a secondary villain that means absolutely nothing to the audience, we also spend an hour trying to get a piece of equipment that, in the end, Dom and the crew don't even need to capture Shaw, making the entire point of the movie irrelevant. Furthermore, all these scenes are just designed to get the coolest shot possible without ever thinking about the real-world implications of dropping a car from a plane to go and get a piece of equipment that doesn't even end up doing a damn thing to help them reach their end goal of catching Shaw. This guy being introduced to want to kill Ramsey means nothing. This doesn't matter because 30 minutes into the movie, we had Shaw dead to rights, and this wasn't the only time this happened because 2 other times they had the shot and they let Shaw talk his way out of a clear death because the movie wanted it to happen. The story doesn't matter because the filmmakers were only making this movie with the intention of getting a few cool shots, no matter how unrealistic, and they'll just Frankenstein the movie together in a coherent story in the edit. You can't make a movie in the edit with no clue where the story is going to end up in the first place. You also can't clearly introduce one antagonist just to turn around and ignore the entire point of the movie and go on side missions to introduce a new antagonist that in the end leads to nothing and isn't even a part of the main story. I mean, literally, the only reason this has the highest score on Rotten Tomatoes is because of the Paul Walker tribute at the end, because the story actually makes 0 sense and is cluttered with nonsense. You can't fill the screen with cool shots if the shots have no relevance to the plot or the overarching story. A shot for shot's sake is just as good as Ronda Rousey's acting in this movie.
I don't know what you're doing, but you better think about this, Toretto. It ain't too late to stop this.
The Fast and Furious franchise is notorious for its overly masculine men fighting to win over these hypersexualized women. And here's where I finally talk about the problems with that. I already alluded to the hypermasculinity Dom portrays in this movie, and nearly every character does it in every movie, so talking about masculinity and male gaze now is a bit irrelevant because all 9 movies overcompensate. When I talk about male gaze and masculinity, I'm not talking about how it pertains to the framing of females in this movie, although that could easily be talked about. I'm talking about the men. Male gaze is a term that was used to describe how movies are framed with the view of the audience in mind. At the time, the filmmakers were all men, and the audiences were also all white men. So, male gaze is less of a man looking creepily at a woman, and more of how men look at other humans. So, for example, female gaze isn't a term because it is included in male gaze because it's how the filmmaker frames the subject, and that's why male gaze is a gender-neutral term. In the Fast and Furious franchise, male gaze is used a lot as it pertains to the men and how they're framed. Hobbs and Dom always wear shirts that are either skin tight or are wife beaters showing their massive muscles. Dom, Vince, The Rock, Rome, and all the other men are framed and viewed as overcompensating, loud, rude, hypersexualized, muscular, aggressive, womanizing men, and are all part of male gaze because this is how the filmmaker sees them.
Me and you, one-on-one, no one else around. I will beat your ass like a Cherokee drum.
So when we look at how the men are viewed by the filmmaker in The Fate of the Furious, it's interesting to see how the director views men. In this movie, the over-masculine men are viewed as pieces of meat every woman swoons over, but also they can't handle the fact that a man they view as beta has power over them. The Rock is the best example of this relationship with Little Nobody. Hobbs is arrested and being lectured by the new Junior, and Hobbs and the filmmakers don't take him seriously, beating him up so easily, and Mr. Nobody allows this to happen because he's a little shit. Hobbs also has this confrontation in the jail with Shaw, how both of them would beat the other to the death in a hand-to-hand fight, neither wanting to accept the fact that one of them, The Rock, is much stronger and bigger than the other. Throughout the movie, Hobbs and Shaw are overcompensating, overly aggressive, and unwilling to help the other achieve what they ultimately both need and can get through simple cooperation. The filmmaker views these meatheads as pig-headed, brutish, and incredibly aggressive.
Don't have to take it down, believe me, Flicks. I'm taking it.
You're taking my boot right up your ass.
Guys.
This is how the filmmaker views these gym rat alpha male people, and I haven't even gotten to Rome. Oh, poor Tyrese Gibson. What have you subjected yourself to? So, Rome had an actual character in the second movie, and then in the fifth, they just decided they're just going to remove most of it and just make him the butt of all jokes. Rome is an insecure, overly aggressive, insecure, loud, compensating, oh, did I mention insecure man. He's only subjected to these terrible jokes.
Then don't give him a target. Everybody get in front of us, line up, and we'll take the head. What? I need to switch cars right now.
Loud yelling.
Where you going? This is crazy.
Reaction lines, and even more terrible jokes.
Get us out of here! Why are you always yelling?
Rome is viewed as a non-threat to the rest of the group, and becomes self-conscious that he is viewed as a lesser person in the group. So in the previous movie, he finally asked for some control in the say of the plan.
This time, I leave. Seriously. If I don't start making decisions, I'm out.
And it's played off as a joke because it's Rome. He's a lesser man. After all, Rome is not as good of a driver, he can't fight as well as Dom, he's less loyal, and he's always overcompensating for his insecurities. In this movie, Rome is the 11th most wanted man of the group and can't accept the fact that this woman is more wanted than he is.
So, I'm missed. Yeah.
That's impossible.
What number did they come in at?
Rome is only played off for jokes because the filmmaker views every man in this movie as overly masculine, overly aggressive, brutish, overcompensating, insecure, loud, and void of all emotions besides anger. This is how the filmmaker sees viewers of his movies.
Because where I'm from, we don't settle fights by throwing bombs.
Well, that's funny because where I'm from, we don't need women to run to our rescue.
This is how he sees you. These flaws in all the characters aren't seen as flaws, but rather positives, or in Rome's case, played off as a joke so the viewer can relate to these main characters. A movie that is an overly masculine brofest sexualizing women for men's enjoyment sees his viewers the same as these men. This is how the filmmaker sees you, an overcompensating, hyper-aggressive, comically masculine man. All these men are insecure about their sexuality and being in touch with their emotions, something that somehow never changed in any of these movies. These characters never have flaws that are fixed because these clear character flaws are never seen as that, but rather a part of their character. There are so many other elements I could talk about in these movies, and so many other flaws in these movies specifically, but I don't want to waste your time. My hope is that you come back to this video as a tool to learn how to view movies and how a movie can easily be messed up. Clearly, there are other aspects of the movie that can be messed up, like terrible acting in nearly every movie, but that's less of something a filmmaker can fix themselves and more on the actors themselves. If I wanted to rewatch any of these movies, I'd probably choose one of the first four because they try to make cars and driving look cool, where 5 and on just try to make men look cool and badass, which I can find thousands of movies that do the exact same thing. I don't want to shit on the filmmakers because they really tried in these movies, and they're much more talented than I am, but to say these movies shouldn't be viewed critically because it's mindless action is just missing the point entirely. No movie should be removed from criticism because then there's no point in making anything of quality, because all the movies would just be made for no reason. Viewing movies like these are a good way at better understanding and enjoying movies, and hopefully this will give you a good understanding of critical ways to view movies in the future.
On TV.
I know that this one is super long, and I'm sorry that it took me forever to make. It's just, you can't watch 9 movies once and remember everything, so you gotta watch 9 movies twice, and then you gotta record all 9 movies, so watching 9 movies, what, 27 times? Like, that's If you guys like this video, please leave a comment, hit me with a like, I would really appreciate it. If there's any movies or franchises you want me to cover, it will probably take a while because I probably need a break after this one, but let me know. And I'll see you guys in the next one.